This is draft season presented by Moody's, a proud partner of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmeelk, joined by Tony Pauline from the Hackensack Meridian Health Podcast Studio. Keep getting better. Thank you for being with us. It's our final draft season of the 2025 draft cycle. Not for 2025. We'll be back with you in August again, getting ready for the 2026 NFL draft. And that's what we're going to start doing right now. So obviously, Tony and I have not gone through like the reams and details of tape on a lot of these players, but this is pretty much going to be our watch list for the 2026 season. We'll have more when we come back in August. I've watched a lot of the guys Tony sent me on his list. Some guys I haven't. So we'll go through some of the big names, the kind of contours of the draft class in general. Tony, to give fans an idea of what we're going to be looking at in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, there are some position groups that look good on paper now, but as we'll talk about, a year ago we were talking about positions like quarterback and others that look good that really turned into a bit of a bust. So basically, you gather the information, you get your list ready. I know myself, I'll start the film work for 2026 in about 2 weeks. But I think my big takeaway from getting my list together was Clemson should have a
Yeah,
really good football team this year. I mean,
especially on
quarterback,
defense.
receiver,
Yeah.
offensive line, all three tiers, all three levels of the defense. I mean, they've got a lot of potential star players. And the irony is, when you look at the depth chart, none of these guys are transfers. It's not like they're buying players with big NIL deals, and they're able to keep their own players. So, and that's the way Dabo Swinney likes it. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, we'll go through the names, how Clemson does during the season, and what the end result is for the 2026 draft.
What other position groups jump out to you from this 2026 draft class that could be thick?
On paper, the quarterback position looks really good. But then again, if you go back to our show in May of 2024, when we were talking about the 2025 draft, we said, hey, coming off that 2024 draft with all those quarterbacks going into the top 12 picks, you look forward to 2025, you said, Drew Allar, Carson Beck, Shedeur Sanders,
Quinn Ewers.
Jalen Milroe. And you thought that the 2025 draft had a lot of promise at the quarterback position, but it went bust. So on paper right now, we'll get into it a little bit detail. The quarterback position looks pretty good. I also like the off-ball linebacker spot. I mean, you had what? Basically 2 off-ball linebackers, 3 off-ball linebackers in the first, second, third round. When you look at next year's class, good athletes who are 3-down players, good in pursuit, get in the run defense, can also cover. Those 2 areas I really like a lot. And I think what we're going to be talking about is potentially the best player in the 2026 draft is a safety, which, really, doesn't often happen. And, do you downgrade the position because he's a safety, or what do you do? Well, we'll talk about that in depth when we get to the defensive backs.
Yeah, we will. All right, so let's start at quarterback, Tony. I think this is a good place to kind of get going here when we have this conversation. And you mentioned it. This time last year, we were talking about Quinn Ewers as a potential, first round, second round type of player. Same with Carson Beck. Carson Beck ends up going back to school because he feels like he's going to be a day 3 pick with a late season injury. Quinn Ewers drops all the way to the end of day 3 in the 2025 NFL draft. So a lot of development still to go for all of these players. And I know, I've seen people say, well, if Garrett Nussmeier came out this year, if Drew Allar came out this year, there was a chance they could have been first round picks. Yeah, maybe. But when you watch them, Tony, and you have a lot of guys on the list besides those 2, there's still a lot of development that has to happen for all of these quarterbacks we're about to list.
I think when you look at Drew Allar, right now he's my number 1 quarterback, but I go back to what he did as a freshman, where he looked like, wow, he was making great decisions. He looked like an NFL passer. Obviously, he's got the body type. He's got the arm to play on Sunday. His game is kind of stagnated. In fact, it's gone in reverse. He seems a little bit indecisive now. He was bailed out by Tyler Warren last year. In fact, I think he targeted Tyler Warren too much rather than using all his receivers. But you look at his upside and you look at his previous film and you say to yourself, if he can get back to that and improve on what he did early in his Penn State career, he's going to be a very early pick at the quarterback position. I don't think he would have been a first rounder if he entered the draft. When Shedeur Sanders and Quinn Ewers and all those other guys fell out, I thought Allar would definitely fall out. I think he made the best decision by going back. I know it was back and forth from what I was told. I was early on. He said, or the word was early on. Penn State people were saying he was going to enter the draft. I'm sure they kind of lured him back with a nice NIL deal, but in the end, that was the best decision for him.
All right, and then the next guy on your list here, Tony, and I went back and I watched him, and boy, it's fun.
Yeah.
He's a fun player to watch. That's Lenore Sellers, the quarterback out of South Carolina. He's 6'3", 242 pounds. No, I'm not saying that incorrectly. 242 pounds. He's a really young player. He's only been a full-time starter 1 year for South Carolina. And he's not just a passer. He completed 65% of his passes last year, 2,500 yards, 18 touchdowns, 7 picks. This guy is a dynamic runner, Tony.
Yep.
674 rushing yards last year, 7 touchdowns, including a 75-yard touchdown run. If he continues to build up in the pass game, and I think you can make the argument he's maybe even further along than Jalen Milroe was at this point as a passer, or at least in the same category. If he can continue to progress in that area in 2025, in his 2025 college season, this guy could be the first overall pick given his skill set.
Yeah, you kind of stole my thunder there. If there's a Jalen Milroe type at the quarterback position, it's Sellers because he's got the best physical tools. He's got the strongest arm. He's the guy that is most dynamic carrying the ball, make plays with his arm and a leg. He's more upside than anything else right now, but you saw terrific flashes last season. I mean, I thought that South Carolina really should have done better with all the talent they had in that field. Now, granted, he loses most of his pass catching targets, although he has the Harbor kid, the Nick Harbor kid, who's the another dynamic 6'5" receiver that runs in the 4.2s or whatever it was when we had Bruce Feldman on last August. But yeah, I mean, he's got the physical skills. He now has to learn to go from being a thrower to a passer, from an athlete to a quarterback. If he does that, I agree with you. Could be the first pick of the draft at the very least, is going to be a very early selection in 2026. What's going to happen is if he improves, some quarterback coach or some offensive-minded head coach in the NFL is just going to absolutely fall in love with the guy and say, you know what, you look how big he is. You look at his mobility, the athleticism carrying the ball, the ability to make all the passes, and just throw the ball downfield for huge yardage with speed. I'm going to turn him into a passer, which is another reason why he could go very early.
All right, the third guy on your list here, Tony, is Cade Klubnik out of Clemson. I went back and I looked at him. It's just it reminds me of the offense they ran when Trevor Lawrence was there, to be honest with you. A lot of, RPO stuff. Those are really nice deep ball. I think he moves around pretty well. He's a pretty good athlete. But I just think some of like the intermediate, middle of the field NFL stuff has to get a little bit better. But I think you certainly see at 6'2", 210 that he has the physical ability and the athleticism to be an NFL quarterback.
What I like Klubnik is his development at the position. Remember, he was the guy that replaced DJ Uiagalelei when Uiagalelei was struggling. And early on, he looked like a running quarterback who was more of a Bo Nix type, if you will. If you remember, Bo Nix early in his Auburn career looked like he was, a chicken with no head, the way he would run around and throw passes up the field. That was Klubnik early in his Clemson career. He's made tremendous strides at the quarterback position. I like his field vision. I like his poise. I like the patience, the way he leads the team. He's absolutely headed in the right direction. When you look at Sellers, you're looking at a guy with great upside. When you look at Allure, you see a guy that was great, looked outstanding. At one point in his career, is kind of leveled off, and you hope he can get back to that. When you look at Klubnik, you look at a guy that's made a lot of progress throughout his college career. May not have the great upside, but he's an excellent passer.
All right, then you got Arch Manning at number 4, Tony. And look, it was such a small sample size last year. Yes, It's impressive. But look, I'd be shocked if he even came out last year, to be honest with you. So I'm not going to lie to you, Tony. I'll watch him games, and I'm not going to study any Arch Manning tape until I find out he's coming out in the draft next year, because I think he's going to want to stay there and start for a couple seasons.
Well, look at the family history. I mean, Peyton Manning used up all his eligibility. Everyone thought all Jet fans were excited in '97 when he thought he was going to enter the draft. He went back. Eli used up all his college eligibility. Shedeur Sanders used all of his eligibility. So I agree with you. I would be shocked if Arch Manning enters the 2026 draft. I also agree with you. I see these mock drafts and they have Arch Manning as the first player taken based on what? His
That game
last
and a
name?
half, Tony, was just unbelievable.
Against Louisiana Monroe is the game he started. Remember, we just came out of a situation where it was nonstop talk about a guy based on his name. You're supposed to learn, from your mistakes. And the fact that when Texas was struggling and Quinn Ewers was struggling in the middle of the season, yet Steve Sarkisian, an offensive-minded coach, stuck with Ewers after he came back from the injury, even though the entire football world was screaming for Arch Manning, as well as the Texas Longhorn fans, put Arch Manning on the field, and Sarkisian said, I'm sticking with Quinn Ewers. And it worked out for him. In my mind, in my opinion, is very telling. Tells you that, yeah, Arch Manning may have a lot of upside. Obviously, you expect the bloodlines and the tutelage, to really help him, but he needs a ton of work. I mean, please, enough with this Arch Manning being the first pick in all these mock drafts. Let's learn from the Shedeur Sanders situation.
All right, let's go to Tennessee next, or rather, we used to be Tennessee for our next player at number 5, Tony. And I did some work on this, so you can say it with me. Nico Iamaleava. Nico Iamaleava. And that's how you pronounce the last name. So we'll be talking about that name. Was at Tennessee. Yeah, everyone saw all the stuff. He wanted the bigger NIL deal. He ended up leaving, went to UCLA, right, is where he ended up. So he's a guy, Tony, that I think is very interesting. He's tall. He's 6'6", 215 pounds. He's well put together. He's got a big-time arm. And I think he was smart to try to get out of that kind of, old school Baylor, Bryles type of spread system that Tennessee runs to get a better look at him in more of an NFL offense. So I don't know exactly what UCLA is going to run with him. You might know better than me. But he's a guy that certainly has the tools.
Well, I mean, UCLA, it was the tale of two teams last year with UCLA. I mean, Deshaun Foster took over late after Chip Kelly, made the decision after a recruiting process that he was leaving. They looked horrible the first half of the season, and they were very respectable late in the year. So they are absolutely a team on the rise. Now, I mean, they had Joe. Let's look at. I think that he is a better passer, or he's further along than former Tennessee quarterback Joe Milton, who started his career at Michigan. Similar size, big arm, but I think he sees the field better, and I think he has. He's more of a passer now than Milton was. The thing with Milton was he consistently made plays with his arm rather than seeing the field. This kid seems to be able to make plays, seeing the field, and he does a good job. Granted, he needs a lot more work on his game. It's going to be interesting, that whole situation that took place at Tennessee, where he wanted to renegotiate his deal, wanted more money, how that sits with NFL teams. Evidently, from what I was told, it was more people surrounding him than the kid himself who was doing that. But still, when you look at him as an NFL prospect, he's got all the physical tools. He's shown a lot of ability. Remember, Tennessee, made it to the college football playoffs last year, lost in the first round to Ohio State. So he's been in a big spot before. He's got great upside. Takes his game to the West Coast, ironically, the Big Ten. That's going to be interesting, but I love his upside, and hopefully he keeps his focus on the football field and he continues to improve.
All right, and then the last guy I want to touch on individually, then we could touch on the last of your list, and then we'll go a little faster these other positions, obviously. Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, someone that people thought might come out this year, and if he did, he had a chance to be a first-round pick. And you see the flashes on tape, Tony. There's a lot to like there. There's good flexibility in the arm, different arm angles. He just looks like a fluid athlete back there. He's accurate. But some of his decision-making and things of that nature towards the end of the year got a little bit dicey, where he made some mistakes, and you kind of like, maybe he wasn't ready yet. He ends up going back to school to LSU. But I think he's one of these guys that has the chance to vault to the top of this group if this year goes as well for him as it possibly can.
He's got to improve his field vision. He's got to improve his decision-making. He's got to be quicker making decisions. He has the same problem second half of last year that Quinn Ewers did, in my opinion. Very late pulling the trigger, didn't see the field as well. He's got to improve on that, because if he doesn't, he's not going to go as high as most people think possible.
Then you have John Mateer, Sam Levitt, and Carson Beck rounding out your top 10 here, Tony.
I mean, let's concentrate on Carson Beck. He was a guy that I never thought was a top 10 pick, but some people were talking about him as a top 10 pick. Makes the right decision. He stays in school. Granted, he transfers to Miami. I'm sure that $10 million NIL deal was very enticing and was an easy decision for him. You know, can Miami Hurricanes hit lightning in a bottle for the second year in a row, get a transfer quarterback that does an incredible job and becomes the first pick of the draft? Beck really needs to improve his decision making. He throws too many interceptions. He tries to force the ball. He's more physically gifted than he is. The mental intangibles at the position needs to improve his field vision and his decision making. If he does, he could be a first round pick. If he doesn't, he's going to be a day 3 pick.
I'm with you. All right. Draft season is presented by Moody's, a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. All right, Tony, let's jump to the running back position. I watched Jeremiah Love from this group, so I want to start there. Man, he's good. To me, it's his ability to go from 0 to 60 in a snap. His acceleration at his size, to me, is just phenomenal, and he finds the hole pretty quick, too.
Well, that's the thing is he's got, it's not that he's a smaller back, that just turns on a single step. He can turn it on a single step, and he's got excellent size, excellent vision, finds the hole. If there's a little bit of space, he's gone. And he's got the size and the strength to run on the inside. So, I mean, it's a shame he was injured during the college football playoffs, really didn't get to play that much. You love the upside. You got to think that this is his last year before he enters the draft. I think he's a faster version of Ashton Jeanty. I don't know that he is as creative as Ashton Jeanty. We'll see about his pass-catching skills next year.
All right, what other running backs jumped out to you, Tony, that you think fans should keep an eye on this year? One of the more fun running back position, one of the fun positions to watch over the course of a college year.
Yeah, Justin Haynes, Alabama running back who's now transferring to Michigan. Very quick, very creative, sees the field, very shifty on the inside. Quintavious Wisner of Texas, an explosive home run hitter that's also an outstanding pass catcher out of the backfield. Jade Knott, who goes from Cal to Oklahoma. Jade Knott entering the 2024 season was graded as a potential day 2 pick, but he was injured and he barely played at all last year for Cal. In fact, I don't think he played at all. Transfers to Oklahoma. Our buddy Jim Nagy was able to bring him over. He is fast. You talked about Jeremiah Love. Jade Knott has a lot of those same skills in the sense that if there's the slightest opening on the field, of the running lane, he is gone. He has explosive speed, can beat defenders into daylight. A lot of people like Mekhi Hughes. Played at Tulane last year. He's going to be at Oregon this year. He's incredibly shifty. He shows a nose for the end zone. He's got a nice build. Need to really improve his pass catching skills out of the backfield and become more productive in that area. And of course, I didn't mention, but the Penn State duo is also 2 guys to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go to. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, 2 players we talked about during last year's shows, as they were a big part of that running attack for Penn State. So 2 other guys to keep an eye on. All right, let's jump to the wide receiver position here, Tony. And again, we don't have Jeremiah Smith coming out. We don't have the Alabama receiver coming out, who is that, Antonio Williams? I'm trying to remember. No, that's the Clemson receiver. I'm trying to think about who the Alabama receiver is that was really good at the end of last year. It'll come to me. But we do have some good players in this wide receiver class. You're always going to have good players, and I'm not sure if we're going to have any like top 10, top 15 players. But again, it's a fun group, and I think it's a group that kind of does a little bit of everything here. You have Carnell Tate, the 6'3" wide receiver out of Ohio State that'll take over Emeka Egbuka's spot as the number 2 to Jeremiah Smith, and then Antonio Williams from Clemson as your top 2 guys.
Yeah, the kid that you're thinking about from Alabama is actually Ryan Williams.
Ryan Williams, thank you. I knew there was a Williams. Thank you.
Yeah. Carnell Tate, he's got excellent size, very reliable hands, came up in big spots last year, as did Emeka Egbuka for Ohio State. Not the deep threat that Jeremiah Smith is, but very reliable. And again, like Egbuka, is going to play second fiddle to Jeremiah Smith, but has enough tools that I believe he could end up as a first-round pick next year. And, Ohio State just keeps pumping out the receivers. We talk about the LSU receivers because those are usually the guys that go very early in the draft, but Ohio State just continues to pump out receivers. Obviously, a lot of it's going to come down to the quarterback play with Will Howard leaving. Antonio Williams, he's got average size, but he's a good route runner. I watched him in 2022, liked him a lot. Had a foot injury in 2023, which really limited his play, rebounded well last year, incredibly productive. That connection between him and Cade Klubik is will determine where both of those guys end up in the draft. But again, I think Williams, don't know that he's a first-round pick right now. I do think he can, at the very least, he's an early second-round choice. And then Evan Stewart of Oregon, who we talked about, the Texas A&M transfer, who we talked about multiple times during the season. I was a bit surprised he stayed back rather than entering the draft, but it could be a very good choice for him. He's got all the tools to be a dominant number one receiver. He's got good size, catches the ball well, he's got good speed. What he needs is to consistently play at a high level because he's very streaky. He'll disappear for long stretches, but when he's on his game, he's both a game-controlling and a game-breaking receiver.
Yeah, and then a couple of the wide receivers, Tony, on your list, and a couple I'll bring up that I watched that aren't. Denzel Boston, really big-bodied wide receiver, 6'4", 209, kind of a guy that's going to be a contested ball winner. And then Jordan Tyson from Arizona State, Tony. This is a guy that was really interesting to me. I liked this tape a lot. I thought it was really good. Remember, he got hurt at the end of the year, so he wasn't in that bowl game, and that could have made a difference for them in that game if he was out there with the aforementioned quarterback Sam Levitt, who's also going to be a pretty good quarterback in this class. But he had a knee injury in 2022, end of 2023 was an issue. He ended up redshirting that year. Then he had a clavicle last year, so an injury thing to worry about him. He's 6'1", 195. To me, he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He's fast. He's a good route runner. He can catch it. Tyson's a guy that I think ended up being a really nice player at wide receiver.
Very reliable and was incredibly productive last year. I mean, one of those guys where when the ball was in the air, 9 times out of 10, it was going to Tyson and opponents couldn't stop him. And I agree with you. I mean, they were really hurt by the fact that he couldn't play in the college football playoffs. Don't know how well he's going to test, but I think he's a real good receiver and a real good football player. I think right now you're looking more like day 2 with him.
You have Malachi Fields there, who's gone from Virginia to Notre Dame. Contested catch wideout. You could talk about him, Tony. And I'm going to throw 2 of the names out to you. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I see a few different guys I think could be good slot receivers in this year's draft. And I'll throw a few names out there. I think Eugene Wilson out of Florida is a guy who I think is a quick receiver. I like what I saw from him. Makai Lemon out of USC. Again, these guys are like 5'10", 5'11", 190. Really quick slot, really good. And then Kevin Concepcion, who's transferring from NC State to Texas A&M. He had a pretty big year as a freshman in 2023. He had 839 yards. Last year, NC State did not do well. They had a rough quarterback situation. He had just 53 catches for 460 yards. And he had a couple drops in there. But man, this guy can move. He can change directions. He can catch it. So I think you could have a good slot class here, Tony, where you have a bunch of guys that can win inside a little bit.
Just want to go back to Malachi Fields. Like you said, goes from Virginia to Notre Dame. A bigger, short-handed guy. There was talk that he was going to enter this year's draft. Now he goes back to Notre Dame. Obviously, the situation is going to be a little bit different with Notre Dame, with Riley Leonard moving on. But still, it's a good situation for him to showcase his skills there.
And then another guy that I know a lot of people like is Eric Singleton out of Georgia Tech, who's 5'11", 190. Georgia Tech just does not have a top passing game, so his numbers are very depressed. But he's a guy that I know a lot of people think he's fast. He can run by people. And, whenever I think he might run in the 4.3s. And I think that's something that you should keep an eye on, too, moving forward. I did not watch any tight ends, Tony, so I'm going to give you the floor on this one. What tight ends jumped out at you?
A name that people don't mention, but they should, Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt.
He was good last year. He almost came out.
Yeah. By way of New Mexico State. He was thinking about entering the draft. He would have been a day 2 pick, but if you go back in one of the shows that we did in December, maybe even in January, I was told that Vanderbilt gave him a $1 million NIL deal, which is why he stayed. Now, remember, the New Mexico State coach, or the former New Mexico head coach, New Mexico State head coach, went to Vanderbilt and brought a lot of players with him, including Eli Stowers. Stowers is your prototypical move tight end. He is a tight end that plays the position like a receiver. He's short-handed. He can get down the field. I have him as a day 2 pick. I think eventually everyone's going to come along that way. We'll have to see how he tests. But he's been productive for a number of years. I mean, he was good at New Mexico State before he went to Vanderbilt last year, and he played well against top competition. The other kid is Oscar Delp out of Georgia. Not very productive, but he's got a developing game, good pass catcher, good blocker. I mean, he's one of those guys that if he has a big year, could slide into the day 2 in 2026. People that asked me about him coming into the season, it's like, well, it was all Brock Bowers in 2024 as far as 2023 when it came to Georgia. But Delp, I think, did a good job taking over as that number 1 tight end at Georgia, and he's got a lot of upside.
All right, let's jump over to the offensive line position here, Tony. Unless there's someone else at tight end you want to mention, you're good?
That's it.
Perfect. All right, let's go to the offensive line here, Tony. And the consensus name that's on top of everyone's boards right now is Caden Proctor, the big, and I mean big, offensive tackle out of the University of Alabama. I apologize, I'm looking down here, folks. I have my notes on all these guys. I don't have them memorized. 6'7", listed at 369 pounds.
Right.
And you watch him, he blocks the hell out of people. He's physical. He can toss people around. But, man, as you might imagine, at 369, there's just not a whole lot of movement skills there. And I wonder if a guy's, you can get too big sometimes. And I wonder if he might try to drop weight from last year to this year as he tries to make the jump to the pros.
Well, like I say, he's a J.C. Latham type. And I think the resounding theme right now at the tackle position is there are a lot of college left tackles who project a right tackle on Sunday. Like you said, he's massive. Plays with excellent knee bend. I mean, fundamentally sound. He's not just a guy that is an arm wrestler or mauls people. He can maul people, but he blocks with solid fundamentals, gets leverage on opponents. But again, I think he eventually is going to move to the right side. As J.C. Latham, I believe, is moving to the right side this year. Late J.C. Latham was a top 10 pick. Could Proctor be a top 10 pick? Potentially.
And Austin Barber's another guy that you see a college left tackle maybe moving to the right side out of Florida.
Nice, big, wide-bodied guy. Uses his hands well. Did a solid job in pass protection, but I don't believe he has the foot quickness or the ability to slide laterally to stay at left tackle. Still think he could potentially be maybe a late first-round pick, more like an early second-round pick at this point.
Couple other Florida players. You have Jake Slaughter, his teammate at guard, Tony, and then Francis Mauigoa out of Miami, also down there in Florida. Plays right tackle. Just when you look at him, he kind of just, I know he's 6'6", 315, but he just looks kind of squatty on tape. Like he almost looks like he's built more like a guard to me. But, he's got really powerful hands. He plays with violence. He's got pretty good feet. 2-year starter at right tackle. I'm sure that's where they'll leave him. He's a guy that I think has some potential to sneak into that back end of the first round if he plays well enough.
Relatively athletic, not just a mauler type, although he's strong enough to maul opponents. Good run blocker. I like his pass protection skills at right tackle, just not good enough to move to left tackle.
All right, now let's go to Diego Pounds. Used to be with North Carolina, correct? Now he's with Mississippi. That's a guy I believe we talked about briefly last year at some point on one of our shows. And then you have another tackle right next to him, Trey Zune III. I have not watched him yet, Tony. And then I'll throw in, you can talk about those two guys. Let me hit Spencer Fano out of Utah first, because I did watch him. He was one of the guys that I was actually pretty impressed with. He was one of my favorite players to watch. I think he's getting a little bit bigger. He's only 304 pounds at 6'5", so I think he needs to put a little bit of strength and weight on. He started 1 year at left tackle, 1 year at right tackle. I think he bends well. He moves his feet really well, but I think he does bend at the waist a little bit. But look, I think if he puts some weight on, I think he has a chance to be really good. And one other tackle I'll throw out there before you at your two. I watched Emil Wagner out of Notre Dame. He was their starting right tackle last year, and I talked to one of my buddies who covers Notre Dame. And apparently he was a high school wide receiver. He showed up at Notre Dame at like 260. He played, if the lists are supposed to, or to be believed, I believe his playing weight last year was a 290 on the dot, and he's 6'6". And you see it. He's kind of like this big, long, skinny guy on tape. But, man, he's got long arms. He locks guys out consistently. He moves really well. If he could just put another, 20 pounds on and, play at 315, I think he's a guy that can end up being a really, really good player and a potential really high pick. What did you like about Diego Pounds and Trey Zune?
Well, Diego Pounds in 2023 was an outstanding left tackle who protected the blind side of Drake May. He then transferred to Mississippi. I don't think he played all that well in 2024. A little hint is that he told people that he felt he got better coaching at North Carolina than he did at Mississippi. He's big. He's got good bend. He's a leverage blocker. He's strong. He's just got to get his game back to where it was in 2023. Trey Zune is probably of all the guys on my list the most natural pass blocking left tackle. Good footwork, can slide laterally, agile, can adjust, fundamentally sound, uses his hands well. He's just got to get stronger. Jaden Roberts, who 2 years ago was everybody's favorite guard, comes off a slightly disappointing season. If he gets his game back to where it was, he could be a top 100 pick. Falalea Fayamo, another guy who entering the season as a senior, scouts graded him as a potential day 2 pick, but he was very disappointing and he struggled with injuries last year. Right tackle who may be pushed into guard. And then Clemson has a pair of offensive tackles. Blake Miller, a big, strong right tackle, and Tristan Lee, who is more the athletic pass-blocking left tackle. Again, you got Cade Klubnik back there. He's got 2 good tackles. He also has an outstanding receiver. So this is where I'm going with the Clemson theme.
All right, let's go back to guard real quick. Jake Slaughter from Florida is one, but then you're also a big fan of Jaden Roberts, the big guard out of Alabama.
Right. Well, yeah, like I said, he's a guy who I think coming into 2024, everybody expected, so much more from him. And then it was the kid that the Cowboys took in the first round that stole the show. He's big, he's powerful, he's a mauler, but he's got to get his game back to where it was where he left it off in 2023.
All right, let's go to the defensive line position here, Tony. And there are a bunch of guys here that I think I really like. I think this is going to be one of the strengths of this class, is looking at the guys. And what I like, Tony, for the defensive line and defensive ends in general, you don't see a bunch of 250-pound edge rushers in this group. These are guys that are 260, 270, 280. They all have some really nice size to them. It's a big, physical, long group.
Start off with TJ Parker of Clemson. Again, like I said, he's like James Pierce, but he's bigger. 19 and a half tackles for loss, 11 sacks. Stands over tackle. Occasionally comes out of a three-point stance. It's like 260, 265 pounds. Yeah. Fast up the field, can bend off the edge, creates a lot of havoc in the opponent's backfield. And he shows the athleticism to do a bunch of different things. If you want to play him off the line, you want to have him chase and pursuit, he's able to do those things.
Yeah, look, he was productive last year, had 11 sacks, along with 11 quarterback hits, a 15% pass rush win rate, 54 pressures. He's big, he's long. He's not maybe the guy that is going to bend at the top of the rush as much, but he's got burst. He can bull rush. He can use his length, speed, the power. Really good all-around player. And then, go to Danny Dennis Sutton from Penn State. He was the guy we talked about last year, Tony. He's a bigger guy, too. He's in the 260s. He played opposite Abdul Carter, was a good player. And then I loved Ruben Bain out of Miami, Florida. I think he kind of reminds me of like Jared Verse a little bit. He's just compact, and he plays with power, and he just keeps going, and he's physical, and he's violent. He was exciting for me to watch. And then I had never heard of Gabe Jacas out of Illinois, Tony. I had not heard of him before. He was on your list, so I decided to watch him. That dude can play. He's really good. A bunch of pass rush moves. He's got good size to him. He's almost 270 pounds. I had never heard of him before out of Illinois. I'm not watching a ton of Illinois football, I must admit. But, that was a guy that I didn't know what to expect when I turned on the tape. But at 6'3", 275 pounds, that guy is a good football player.
Ashton Gelati size and style. He's explosive. Is he a defensive end? Is he a defensive tackle? Is he a four-man line? But he's a football player. And he's great off the snap. He's outstanding off the snap. He's incredibly explosive. Really had a breakout year in 2024. Gave consideration to entering the draft. I'm sure he was lured back with a nice NIL deal. A guy definitely keep an eye on. Danny Dennis Sutton, we talked about him throughout the college football playoffs. Obviously picked up the slack when Abdul Carter was struggling with that shoulder injury. He's incredibly athletic. You can use him standing over tackle or out of a three-point stance. He's fast in the straight line as well as laterally. Love his upside. I think he's going to be highly rated going into the season, and Penn State should have a decent team next year.
Absolutely. All right, let's switch to a couple of defensive tackles here, Tony. Kildrick Falk out of Auburn. Boy, he plays a little three technique, but he also plays some five technique where he's lined up just outside the shoulder of the tackle, Tony. He's under 300 pounds, but man, he is big. He gets upfield. He's got a really good burst. He's a guy that I think you can really move around the line. He could be a really good player.
But he's all he's under 300 pounds, but he's 6'5".
Right.
So he should be able to put on weight. I mean, he's big, he's powerful, and he's athletic. Had a breakout season. I think he can be a defensive tackle in a four-man line. I also think if you want to use him as a two-gap defensive end in a three-man line, he has that potential. Had a breakout season last year. Just has to duplicate it in 2025.
All right, and then you have Mateo Ugalele listed here. You have him as the defensive tackle. You watch him on tape. He plays mostly end for Oregon. He reminds me a little bit of Jordan Birch, but to me, I could see him playing both. Why do you have him projecting to a defensive tackle?
I think he'll eventually grow into his body. I mean, he's not that big now, but he's a guy who I think is going to be 15 or 20 pounds heavier, and he's just going to be maybe a little bit too large to be defensive end in the future. Like I said in the notes, defensive end that's going to grow into a defensive tackle. But even at defensive end, 11 and a half sacks, 11 and a half tackles for loss, 9 sacks, stands over tackle, comes out of a 3-point stance. And if his last name sounds familiar, this is the younger brother of quarterback DJ Ugalele,
Oh, are they
who's
related? I didn't know that.
yeah, that's his younger brother, who is now at Oregon.
All right, then we got a couple.
DJ Mateo is at Oregon.
Yes. Two defensive tackles, Tony. Dom Orange out of Dominique Orange out of Iowa State. Just a really big, kind of clogging. He's so wide. You watch him on tape. It's like his
Yep.
shoulders are like 5 inches wide, 5 feet wide. It's crazy. And then Peter Woods out of Clemson, who I was excited by. He's similar to Falk, where he can play, I think, a little three technique, a little five technique. But I was really impressed by his athleticism.
Yeah.
Another Clemson player, Tony, you mentioned, we got a lot of Clemson players on this list where he can move, man. He's got a really nice burst off the line.
He's more of a first step lineman. He's
Yep.
explosive. I want to see him get a little bit stronger, but you say three technique, absolutely, with that first step and the movement ability. Where Dom Orange is more of a gap occupier, more of a natural or potential, I should say, more of a potential nose tackle. You go back to Clemson, and we mentioned Woods. Clemson, although he's not on my list because he did not have a good season, as I am pulling it up here, also has DeMonte Capehart returning. Now, DeMonte Capehart coming into the season was graded as a second round pick by scouts, but he was kind of on and off last year, little consistency, used in a rotational used in a rotational system. There was thoughts he may enter the draft. There were questions about his eligibility. So if you're watching Clemson next year, and when we do the shows next year, we'll talk about it. It's Peter Woods and DeMonte Capehart. The only reason Capehart didn't make my list is because he was terrible last season. And then also, another guy that came in with high expectations who turned into dud season was Bear Alexander, the former USC defensive tackle. You talk about three technique guys with great first steps. I guess there was an issue where he wasn't liked the way he was being used. Decided in October to redshirt, and now he's at the University of Oregon. So that's another guy to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to
Linebacker.
yeah, off-ball linebacker, Tony. I have not watched these guys yet. I know you're very excited about the groups. Why don't you kind of just run through what's on deck here at off-ball linebacker?
The first thing is Anthony Hill Jr. He's just, if you watched Texas last year, and they were always on every Saturday. I mean, this was a guy who was consistently making plays. Yeah, you're wondering, wow, this guy's going to be a top 10 pick, but he was a true sophomore, so he couldn't enter the draft. And I mean, he is a guy. He is a violent linebacker that's outstanding against the run. He's good in pursuit. He's decent, moving in reverse. I expect if he has a good season, he'll enter the draft, and he's going to be a very early pick. Wayne Woodaz, another Clemson kid. He's not flashy, but he's just very reliable, constantly making plays on the ball. Sort of like, and you're going to have to help me out with the name, the Iowa linebacker Jack Campbell, the Iowa linebacker that the Detroit Lions took
Yep.
in the middle of the first round. That sort of player, just not flashy, but smart, instinctive, and constantly making great plays against the ball. Woodaz is like that. Harold Perkins Jr. of LSU, guy who hurt his knee last year. I believe it was in October. I think he gets mischaracterized as an edge rusher. He's not an edge rusher. He's a smaller run and chase linebacker who consistently made plays. You want to talk about a guy that has a violent style to his game, a violent nature to his game. That's Harold Perkins, very highly rated. Obviously, he has to return from that knee injury. Trey Moore of Texas, he's more of your pass rushing edge linebacker, although he's very athletic. He can be used in space. Former Texas San Antonio linebacker, played for the Longhorns last year, decided to go back to school, has a lot of upside. Again, he's going to be broad brush as an edge rusher, but he's a lot more than that. Lander Barton of Utah entered the season with second round grades. Things didn't go all that well. He's a real good run defender who just needs to get back to where he was in 2023, where he showed a complete game. Sonny Styles of Ohio State, former safety, incredibly athletic, outstanding off-ball linebacker who is a three-down player. Derek Moore of Ohio State, sort of an edge Josiah Stewart type in 2024, although 2023 he was used more in space and made a lot of plays. Patrick Payton, guy we've talked about a number of times early in the season on this podcast, from Florida State, guy who coming into 2024, in fact, when Jim Nagy, we had him on back in August, we talked about him, looked like a potential first-round choice as another, Jared Verse sort of undersized edge rusher, was very spotty at Florida State last year. In fact, it was a terrible year for that program altogether. He goes back. He's a guy to keep an eye on. And Jay Schwan Barnum of Michigan, the Maryland transfer, was an outstanding edge rusher at Maryland 2023, was used more as a three-down linebacker last year at Michigan, had a good year, can be used at inside linebacker, can be used as a weak side linebacker, and he showed pass rushing ability. So I think all these guys, you got a good mix of versatile defenders that can rush the passer, that can play in space, that can pursue the run, that can go sideline to sideline, get depth on their pass drops. On paper, I really like this class.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of them, and we haven't had many really good off-ball linebacks come out in recent years, Tony. So it's good to see you got 9 guys on your list here. Hopefully they can continue along and provide a good class at inside linebacker for next year. All right, let's go to the defensive backs, Tony, and you teased this early.
Yeah,
they got a really guy with a big star on top of his head for this one.
I mean, Caleb Downs, the Alabama transfer, who was just brilliant last year at Ohio State, made play after play. He's a safety, but he can play cornerback. He's great in coverage. He's a bigger, faster version of Brian Branch, if you will. I mean, he's great in center field. You can put him over the slot receiver. If you remember, in a lot of ways, he saved Ohio State's season in that Texas semifinal game, because he was the guy on that questionable, second down play where he burst through the behind into the backfield and made that big tackle in space against the run. Just a guy who makes play after play. They're going to talk about Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. Obviously, you understand why, Heisman Trophy contender. But man, Caleb Downs, how many guys from that Ohio State defense were drafted last year, yet the best guy was not eligible for the draft?
What other safeties do you like, Tone?
I like Keon Saab of Alabama, a good rangy safety, good center fielder. Dylan Thiemann of Purdue. Dylan Thiemann transferred from Purdue to Oregon. Incredibly smart, very instinctive. Purdue was a tough film to watch last year because the team was so bad, yet he was a guy who stood out, and he's already getting rave reviews at Oregon during spring practice. Khalil Barnes, very underrated from Clemson, underrated. Terrific run defender who's also very good against the pass.
All right, and then a couple of corners, Tony, that caught your eye, and yet another couple of Clemson players. You mentioned Barnes at safety and now a corner as well.
Avion Terrell, who I believe has more potential than his brother, A.J. Terrell, who also played at Clemson, was a first-round pick. He's doing a great job in the NFL right now. Avion, I think he's further along than where his brother was. as a sophomore. He's got terrific upside, decent size, outstanding ball skills, makes a lot of plays with his back to the ball. One of those guys where it can be tough to scout him because opposing quarterbacks just don't want to throw his way. And then there's Jalen Kilgore from South Carolina, tremendous size, a J.C. Horn type of player who's used at nickelback, but I think if he develops, he's a number one cornerback. The interesting thing right now is at the top of the list, there's more safeties than there are cornerbacks. And we saw last year, the class itself wasn't that good. Although there were a lot of good safeties in this just past draft in the early portion anyway.
I'll just say this: if you're one of these young wide receivers playing 7-on-7 football, whatever it is you're doing, all that stuff, play corner, man. There's not as many of them as there are wide receivers, Tony. And if you're really good at it, you're gonna get picked high and you're gonna make a lot of money. So kids out there, don't be afraid to play corner. The league needs them.
And there were some good corners that were, Damani Jackson of Alabama, who I thought had an off season in 2024 after a terrific, or at least a promising campaign. 2023, Jermad McCoy, Tennessee, if he has a good year, could be a first round pick. Malik Muhammad of Texas, another guy with early round potential. Deshaun Lee, one of my favorites from Iowa that no one talks about. Mansour Delane, who now goes from Virginia Tech to LSU. So there's potential at the cornerback position. I just don't think they are there yet.
Absolutely, Tony. I think that's awesome. I did a little delay there and pop on your thing. That's why I hesitated. Yeah, look, I think it'll be a fun time to kind of develop these guys and figure out where they're going. And who emerges, because I think we could talk about these lists, and you go back and you look at this show last year. Well, the guys we talked about were very different than the guys that end up being picked in the first round, which is why we track it for you all year on draft season, and why you have to stick with us. When we come back in August, we'll probably do our Bruce Feldman Freaks thing. We'll probably try to get the new executive director of the Senior Bowl on, who's new. I have not met him before. Tony, have you?
I don't even know who it is. I mean, so wrapped up with the draft, I haven't even. Who is it?
It is a former Cowboy scout, and his name's not in front of me, so I don't remember it. Sorry, okay. Molly Milton. But we will try to get him on in August, and we'll talk some draft with him, and then we'll start tracking the games. I had no idea early in the year, by the way. I think we're getting Ohio State, Texas in like week 1.
Yeah.
I was talking to Dan Salomon upstairs. He's a huge Ohio State fan. That's how I kind of track a lot of this stuff. And man, we're getting Texas, Ohio State in week 1. That's crazy. So we'll have some good games early on in the football season, Tony. It should be fun. I can't wait to be back with you in a couple of months. I'll try to do some more summer scouting until then. So will you. Any big plans this summer, Tony? What do you got going on?
Well, the immediate plans are in about 2 weeks. I'll start hitting the tape for 2026. You mentioned Ohio State. I was actually at Ohio Stadium this past Sunday, not for a football game, but for my daughter's graduation. So that was a lot of fun being in that place, watching people cheer graduates rather than football players. But, hopefully some trips to Disney, a lot of sun. And when I see you back in August, hopefully I'll have an outstanding tan.
And just real quick, I have not looked at him. I saw some preliminary preseason college football rankings came out, right? For 2026. And let's see, what do we got here? There you go, CBS Sports. Here we go. So the team's kind of in the top 25 this year. Shouldn't be that surprising. This is CBS Sports. I think they're just kind of like doing their own thing. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Clemson, Georgia, Oregon, Notre Dame, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Miami. So that's a lot of blue blood, old school, really good college football teams, Tony, that programs that I think, if they get things together, we should have another pretty competitive year. And with the expanded college football playoffs, who knows what's going to happen.
But then again, these rankings are based on how teams, oftentimes how teams did last year. Listen, I'm an Ohio State fan. My daughter went there. God knows how much money I spent sending her to that school. And we are a root for Ohio State. How is Ohio State a top 5 or 6 team? I mean, you look at they lost their entire defensive line, right? Yeah, they lost one of their best linebackers
and one of the best receivers.
They lost their playmakers
and their quarterback.
They lost quarterback and their running backs, and they lost both of their offensive tackles. So it's sort of like having Arch Manning as the first pick of the draft. I just don't understand with the talent that they lost. I hope they're competitive, but I just think it's going to be a struggle for Ohio State next year, which they don't really care because they've got a national championship in the bag from this past January.
And look, none of these rankings are official or real. It's just people's opinions.
Clemson,
And
Clemson, keep just watch the show. I don't gamble, but Clemson, I mean, and Dabo Swinney's a terrific coach, and he's taken a lot of heat. People saying, oh, his time has passed. He didn't want to get involved in the transfer portal. He doesn't want to sign the NIL deals. He can shut everybody up with a big season. And as we just said, there's a lot of talent on that depth chart, not just college football talent, but NFL talent on their roster.
yeah, look, I think it's a huge year for Penn State, right? You
Potentially.
feel like, their offense has always been what's held them back, and they have a guy that a lot of people, to your point, Tony, are predicting will be the top quarterback selected in the draft. Penn State's defense is always really good under James Franklin, but can they, and they have a couple good running backs that we already mentioned, can they do enough offensively here with Drew Allar for them to be a real national championship type of team here? I've seen them at the top of some of these fake rankings too. So a big year for Penn State to see if they can kind of break through from that top of the second tier group of teams into that first tier and really challenge for a national title.
The big news for Penn State, not only Drew Allar going back, but Jim Knowles, the former defensive coordinator from Ohio State, signing on with Penn State. I mean, he was just a tremendous defensive coordinator. I expect that defense to play lights out. And there was an article about how Knowles showed Drew Allar the scouting report that he put together on him before the Ohio State Penn State game. And the law was like, wow, I didn't know I did all those things wrong. So Knowles is not only going to help the Penn State defense, I think he can help Drew Allar on because he's given an outside perspective on how he's coached against him so successfully the past 2 years because Ohio State has beaten Penn State.
I love it. Tony, good stuff, my friend. Enjoy your summer. We'll talk to you in about 3 months, my friend.
Look forward to it. I've got it on the calendar.
Tony Pauline, John Schmeelk, our final 2025 draft season episode until August. It's all brought to you, of course, by Moody's, a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risk into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. Thank you for joining us in the Hackensack Meridian Health Podcast Studio. Keep getting better. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time, everybody.